Hello everyone from Ukraine, you're watching Channel 24. My name is Andriy Drozd and our guest today is Mr. John Spencer. He's the chair of Urban Warfare Studies at Madison Policy Forum and retired major of the US Army. Mr. Spencer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So my first question would be about the future of the war in Ukraine, the nearest future, I would say, regarding retreating or withdrawing of the Russian army from the northern part of Ukraine in spring this year, and then the other Ukrainian victories near Kharkiv, Izum and Liman regions. What should we expect on the next stage of this war in the south of the country, near Kherson, and generally in all directions?
Yeah, I think we should expect a lot of what we've seen with this, just a more superior Ukrainian military. It doesn't look like Russia is willing to withdraw, so they're willing to sacrifice their men, which is unlike Ukraine from the beginning of this war. They value their soldiers. Russia clearly doesn't, and that's why they've sent so many conscripts to the front lines to try to save ground. But I think you're going to continue to see Ukrainian advances, Ukrainian use of long-range fires like the MLRS and artillery to strike at the Russians and kill, unfortunately, Russian soldiers until they have no option but either to surrender or pull back.
Yeah, so we will see the very similar character of this war that we have seen till this time, that we saw till this time. You know, the art of warfare is constantly changing, and the war of Russia against Ukraine has its own features or distinctions, and it is the usage of military drones, massive usage right now, and the role of anti-tank weaponry is significant. What were the most interesting or maybe even unexpected phenomena and approaches of this war from your perspective?
Sure, so there's a lot to learn from the war in Ukraine that I think that we will be, I used to teach strategy at West Point, we'll be teaching for a long time. You know, some aspects are unchanging. The fact that a military is made up of its means, like soldiers and weapons, but also its will to fight. So Ukraine has taught, should have taught, Russia seems to have forgotten that the most important thing is the will of your soldiers to fight, the will of your nation to support the soldiers. And as an old soldier myself, that really matters. Of course, the character of warfare changes. So the use of man-pads, like the Stingers, that can contest the air so that the enemy can't use his helicopters and his airplanes is very important. The use of drones for all kinds of reasons, for just seeing the enemy or dropping things on the enemy or dropping very big things on the enemy, because the enemy is weak in electronic warfare and other aspects. To stop all forms of drones is being shown importance. The use of the anti-tank guided munitions that can penetrate any tank is very significant, because if your enemy doesn't fight with combined arms, like with infantry, tanks, engineers, artillery together, like the Russians who separate it, it's a lot easier. It's not easy, but it's a lot easier to destroy things. And that's, again, why the Ukrainians are being so smart in their approach to warfare. Their use of these long-range munitions, right? So all militaries around the world don't want to get close to each other. They want to be able to strike each other as far away as they can. So you see this action of longer reaching, artillery rounds, rockets, drones, and then the ability to stop those. And again, that's why, with the West's help, the Ukrainians have taken a very small number of these longer reaching systems and done amazing things that I think will really change the future of warfare on how you protect your ammunition depots, how you protect your command and control cells. And it's causing the character of warfare to change.
Yeah, there are two parts, two key factors. Psychology of war is one thing, and ammunition, level of ammunition, innovations, and so on. And material part of the war is how the army is what ammunition they're using. It's another key factor of the success on the battlefield. You already said about the willing to fight of Ukrainian army. What are the main reasons why Russians are losing the war right now? Psychological reasons, some might say, and structural reasons in Russian army, how the Russian army is functioning. Some might say it is the lack of initiative, the lack of effective decision making on the battlefield among the sergeants and middle rank officers. Even the lack of flexibility and creativity compared to Ukrainians. What would you say? What would be your key factors of Ukrainian success and Russian failure?
Yeah, I mean, all of what you just said is part of it. I mean, for me, I'm an old soldier, so I know what generals have known across the history of warfare, that you have to have soldiers who are fighting for a cause. And that was the first failure of Russia, was not to give their soldier a reason. Why are they in Ukraine? Why are they fighting? Why are they dying? And that gets down to individual soldiers to major units. If they don't have a reason, a fire inside of them, then they won't do the things that the Ukrainians are doing, which is take small groups of people and achieve great things. I mean, it's also about your cohesion within your soldiers and your leadership. I mean, the Russian system is not built on trust in caring for their soldiers. The Ukrainian system is. From the president on down, they know that their leaders care about their lives, their nation cares about their struggle. That translates to combat power, and that's what the Russians don't have. The Russian system is built on discipline and harsh treatment of soldiers, thinking that you just tell them to go fight and they'll do it. That's not the way warfare works.
And 1 month ago, Vladimir Putin started this draft campaign, mobilization campaign, to replenish, to fulfill his exhausted military units on the battlefield. Was it the right move from him, and does it work effectively for Russians right now after months has passed?
Absolutely not. I mean, Putin will go down as one of the worst military strategic thinkers of the world. If your military is already failing, and then you force tens of thousands of young men to go fight in a military that's already failing, it's always going to end bad. And what's crazy is that he mobilized or forced a bunch of soldiers from Russia into Ukraine, but more young soldiers fled the country than he was able to round up and send into Ukraine. So 400,000, 700,000 men left Russia. I mean, Putin is destroying the Russian state by continuing his illegal war in Ukraine. And you can see that through these soldiers, these new soldiers that he's giving like 3 days of training, 5 days of training, and he's putting them on the front line to die.
Yeah, this effect of this mobilization might be terrific for Russian society, for Russian economy, and for military too. I also would like to ask you about the effects of the sanctions on the Russian military industry. Russia shoots a lot of its missiles on Ukrainian targets right now. It loses a lot of tanks and all other military vehicles on the battlefield. Dozens of aircrafts and helicopters were down by now. How fast can Russia actually restore its military potential regarding the sanctions?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And, all war is politics. And Ukraine has mobilized not only the nation of Ukraine, but the entire free world, over 50 nations. Russia's supplies are diminishing, and we knew that. But then we were all, to include me, surprised that they had to turn to North Korea for artillery rounds, and now have to turn to Iran for really bad drones. Now, the drones have caused a lot of damage, and that's unfortunate, but the Ukrainians are also shooting down 80% of them, and soon to be 100% of them. That's a clear sign that Russia is desperate to supply its military. So it can't, we're seeing that it can't force men to fight, and it doesn't have the supplies to even provide the men they're forcing to fight. They're using 1950s, 60s, 70s tanks, of the ones that are not giving up. I mean, the biggest supplier of weapons to Ukraine is Russia, because their men run away from their systems. And that's, as an old soldier, you don't do that if you care about your country, your military. You don't leave equipment on the battlefield for your person you're fighting to take. So yeah, Russia's supplies are very diminishing. The sanctions have worked on computer chips for missiles to you know all kinds of things, and the sanctions will continue to work. Again, Putin is only destroying the Russian state.
Yeah, and what would be the role of this Iranian drones? You already said that they are not very effective. Most of them are down by Ukrainians' anti-craft defense systems. They are cheap, actually, and they were invented as a tool of terrorist threat for terrorist attacks on the peaceful cities, actually. They are not very effective against military targets. But Russians just asked Iran to send them actually thousands of these drones. Would they make a significant changes, an advantage on the battlefield for Russians?
Not at all. And that's why we haven't seen them really used on the battlefield. We've seen them only used as terror weapons against Ukrainian cities and civilians, all war crimes. And they not only sent Iranian or Islamic regime drones, but they sent trainers, which Iran should be held accountable for, directly involved in Russia's illegal war, and they should have increased sanctions on them. But no, they don't have any effect. You can shoot these down with the Ukrainian, just Ukrainian soldiers pointing up at the sky can shoot down these drones. They won't have an effect on the military. It was a desperate act even to employ them.
And the warfare in urban areas and cities are very different from fighting in the forests and on the fields. We can see that Russians failed to win their battle for Kiev and for Kharkiv, and they had lost a lot of men and resources in Mariupol, despite having a real advantage in quantity there. Now it looks we are expecting the Battle of Kherson, and Ukrainians will be attacking there. Russians are now in defending position. What would be the key factors for Ukrainian success in Kherson?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I went to Kyiv in July to study how the Ukrainian people and the military defended Kyiv against this, on paper, the second biggest military. And it's historic, and I will be writing about it. In Kherson, the Ukrainians have, again, fought smarter, and for months have set the conditions so much so that the Russians don't have an option now. They can either surrender, swim, or die. And I think that if you're attacking urban terrain, it is different than defending. And Ukraine, of course, will, unlike the Russians, care about their people, their civilians, and their cities and infrastructure. So they won't start bombing all over the city for no reason. But I think they've set the conditions to where the Russians have no choice but either to surrender or die in the Kherson Oblast, and especially in the Kherson city. And
if you just mentioned the Ukrainian successful defense of Kiev, would you briefly say what were the key factors of Ukrainian successful defense campaign there in the capital?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is literally the greatest victory of the modern world is the defense of the capital city of Ukraine, which saved Ukraine. Although all the cities mattered, right? Chernihiv, Sumy, the brave defenders of all cities mattered. But if the Russians could have gotten into Kyiv, this war would have gone a much different way. When I went to Kyiv and went to Bucha and Irpin and Barbary, what I saw was, yes, the military did great things, but it was their Ukrainian civilians who came out and blocked their streets and fought the Russians as well that helped the military save the city. The blowing of the bridges, the flooding of the rivers, it created such a porcupine or meat grinder for the Russians that they just slowly defeated all the Russian forces that were sent towards Kyiv, and that caused the Russians to be defeated. And I don't say that lightly. They surrendered and withdrew from Kyiv after they were militarily defeated. by Ukrainian civilians and military forces.
Good. Very happy to hear that, because it was really a war for whole nation. We were defending ourselves. Every one of us was like involved.
Yeah.
Probably the last question. How would you estimate or describe our defense cooperation and military aid from the USA to Ukraine? Some people would say it is too slow and America should give Ukraine more weaponry. Others say that President Biden administration is just managing the escalation, trying to avoid a nuclear attack from Putin. What is your opinion?
Yeah, so my personal opinion is, look, I'm an American. I'm proud of how much America has given Ukraine to defend themselves, but it has been too slow. It has been by weapon political decisions of which weapon systems to give at what time, not to escalate it out of fear of escalation. It's a concern, of course, to not allow Putin to escalate, but providing Ukraine the weapons to defend itself should never be viewed as a path to escalation. It's actually a path to peace. This ends by giving Ukraine the weapon systems, to include some that they haven't received yet, like the long-range ATACMS and other weapon systems, to defeat the Russian military in Ukraine. And that's the path to peace. So yes, I believe as a citizen that the U.S. assistance has been too slow and has been restrained in what they give. That has slowed this war. If you want to end this war faster, give Ukraine everything it needs: tanks, aircraft, missiles, radars, give it all.
Thank you for your opinion, Mr. Spencer. We are very thankful to American nation and American government and President Biden's administration for the support we're getting right now. And we hope that this support will go on even after this midterm elections that we are expecting right now in the United States. Thank you once more for this conversation and for your answers.
Thank you. Slava Ukraine.
Heroyam Slava. And thank you, our dear audience, for your attention. You were watching Channel 24 from Ukraine, and our guest today was Mr. John Spencer. Hope to see you soon with our new guest.